Alright guys, it's been a pretty interesting hour and a half here or so, doing miscellaneous things. So I pulled the oil pump out. So first off, I mean, if you want to, you can pull off the lower plate. And in case you guys aren't familiar, you go under here. So here's your engine block, right under here. I took out the whole pump assembly, so you'll see what I mean there. But this bottom plate bolts on, 4 little bolts. This is what bolts to the actual underside of the tractor. So this plate bolts to the underside of that bolts to the underside of the tractor. A few interesting items to note. While I was taking this apart, all of a sudden I had, let's see if we can get the zoom in, these 2 pieces fell out of the oil pump. Well, I don't think they're supposed to be there. I can't tell. This kind of looks like a broken bolt. I don't know if this is like a ferrule or what, but if you look, it's actually threaded on the inside. So, gotta make sure that isn't supposed to go somewhere else. But anyway, it definitely should not have been in here. Probably right here at the entry between the gears, and somehow didn't get in there and break those gears. And at first, when I just saw metal chunks, because it was full of oil, I was afraid it was gear teeth, but the gear teeth all look good. Just so you guys know, when you put this and attach it to the other piece, this is supposed to be a real thin shim around here. It's not just a gasket, but it acts like a shim. So do not put too thick of a gasket here. If you actually look, this one is still here. The zoom can get right. Not that you can really tell in a video, but it's very thin. So the next interesting note, I pull this out, and I thought, oh, you know, that's different than my B. This wasn't on it. This was completely gone. And this was just completely caked with sludge. All around it, all on top, and everything. So I have a spare one of these. Kind of cleaned up. Still got some fluid in it, in this mesh there. Which kind of scares me a little bit, because the screen is meant to hold back all that sludge and keep it from going in your oil lines, and that screen wasn't there. So I'm starting to wonder if I should tear out the oil lines and flush them, or just when I put this back together, undo all the ends and make sure I'm getting fluid everywhere, which might be what I do. That'll be a pretty good indicator, I guess. But honestly, looks like getting to these oil lines on the G is way easier than the B. That is the good news. So I guess before you drop this out, yes, there's just the 3 bolts. However, there is an oil line that goes from here up to the oil filter head assembly. Right there. So you can reach it there. I actually undid that first. You can reach where it goes into the oil head assembly with the wrench fairly easily. I just kind of loosened it, and then once I dropped this down, it was easier for me to just kind of hold it with one hand and unscrew it with the other and take that out. So yeah, you remember the oil coupler. That's a different one that I have, but as you saw, the old one was welded on that side and that side, so that was a real mess at some point. Set that aside. So yeah, it's the oil wasn't too bad in the tractor, but there's a lot of sludge in the bottom of that crankcase. It wasn't just around the oil pump, so I'm gonna slosh some diesel around in there, clean everything up in there, get it all cleaned out. Put the oil strainer on. Strainer, I think that's what it's called, not a screen. Oil strainer. We'll put that on, and then this will be ready to go back in once I get everything cleaned up. So another, again, just kind of interesting thing where, if you're buying one of these tractors, depending on the tractor, the bees getting this out is a real pain. Excuse me, the late bees. The late bees, it's a real pain because there's so many oil lines coming in here, getting them loose without taking out the crank shaft or something like that. But on this, this is very easy to take out. So it may just be a good idea to take out because, again, it had so much sludge around it. And that is where this oil pump is supposed to be sucking the oil in from. So you certainly don't want it to get too clogged up, for whatever reason, wherever all that dirt and crap comes from. But especially in a new tractor, if you guys buy it and maybe it's not in the best condition or something, or maybe you have low oil pressure issues. I don't know. You can think of a lot of reasons, but it may be good to take this out and clean it up. So this screen, even that I pulled this off of another assembly, was caked in sludge, and I just wire brushed it off in some diesel, and looky there, you can see right through it. So nice and clean. And thankfully I had one of these because it's like $26 for a new one, and those couplers are 20. So hey, parts tractors and different parts laying around, saving some money, which is nice. So okay, let's see what we can get into next. Alright, so I got the oil head assembly out after all. Just wanted to look things over and make sure everything was clean inside, which it is. So when you take your oil filter off and you look up inside the housing, first thing you'll see is this thing here. Now up above this flange, are 3 bolts that attach the oil head assembly from underneath. You can't get to those, and you can't take the oil head assembly off until you take this piece out. Now, just like the manual says, in order to get this out, if you guys have checked out my other video, my B will explain this too. There's 2 holes on opposite sides. You get I think it's 1/4 inch diameter. No, I think it's 5/16 diameter rod, something like that. Bend it, bend the ends like that. Stick it up in there and get those ends in these holes. I'd slide a pipe over it in order to hold it together. Otherwise, when you whack the bottom, it'll want to spread out and not pull on it. So I spread a pipe over. Once I have those engaged, hand sledge, knock them right out, hammering in between here. So once you get that off, you have access to take the oil head assembly out. Which if you look at the underside here, this is where those 3 bolts come in from underneath through the canister housing. And then that separates both these pieces. So this really just sits down inside like so. Now, something to be very wary of. Inside is this little spring. That spring goes right here. Don't forget that. Don't lose it. That spring is meant to hold down this flap, which this flap acts as a bypass. If there, I think, is too much back pressure or something, it pushes against the spring and opens it up, and it can bypass the filter. So if you forget that spring, then without a force pushing down on it, it'll probably float a little bit. You'll get some bypass. This spring, I don't think it's even labeled. In the parts manual for the B, I specifically remember this is shown in the picture, but it doesn't even have an identifier, like no number, no part number, or anything. So don't lose that. You can see I've got one of the oil lines here still attached that goes to the main bearing. Here's the other one to the main bearing. This is the oil line going from the oil pump to this housing right here. And this one here goes from the oil housing up to the governor. So everything looks good. The top of the housing where all this sits is not indented, as in no one like over tighten the filter. You'll see that if you watch one of my first videos on my B, the oil canister housing was bowed in a little bit because someone had over tightened it. You can flatten it out by hammering from underneath, but everything looks good on that, so it'll get a good seal. If any of you have trouble tightening your oil filter cap, or sometimes this breaks up here, if people over tighten the bottom, not only will they bow in the top, like I just said, of the housing, but you will strip this out. And the only way to fix this is to take all of this out, just like I said, or yeah, I've done here. I mean, you technically, you don't have to take off your main bearing lines or even these other lines. I guess, so let me be clear with that. In order to take this out, if you were to strip this out or anything, you got to take this piece out, undo your 3 bolts from underneath, and then this piece itself just can come out, so you wouldn't have to undo any of your oil lines. So yeah, and then this top here is your oil pressure adjustment with the lock nut. Oops, sorry, zoom. Lock nut and adjustment screw. So I think I'm going to end this video here. The only thing I haven't really done with the engine is take the connecting rods apart or away from the crankshaft. I'll probably do that just to inspect the bearings, but everything seems copacetic. I'm not sure if I will even take the crankshaft out. The only thing I would think about is putting a new gasket in on the left-hand main bearing, because that's kind of an external, versus the right hand is underneath that first reduction gear cover housing. So I don't know if I'm going to do that or not. I don't know if it's necessary. So this pretty much concludes to me that everything on this tractor was taken apart at some point. Between the transmission, had the gear teeth that somebody fixed at some point. The engine has been all apart because it's been upgraded pistons, connecting rods. The main bearings look good. The cam has been fixed and welded up. So that all has been touched. The radiator was switched to a water pump. So that was switched out. One other thing to note. Learned this on the Facebook group today. So if you guys aren't a part of the 2-cylinder page on Facebook, I highly recommend it. You never know what you learn. So this, they were calling it the horseshoe bracket. Is really, for these earlier G's, located about 1.5 inches forward. But when you go and transition to a water pump, it would interfere with this pulley. So you actually have to cut this out and move it back. Others were saying a minimum of 15/16. So if you can tell in the video, you can see where it was and where it was moved back to. So I just found that very interesting. All these little details that you wouldn't figure out or know until somebody tells you, or you go and change this out and it doesn't work. So yeah. Well, everyone have a good day. Hopefully start getting this all back together in the coming weeks or so. Probably be a little bit slower going back together. And have a good one.